On a hot summer afternoon, General James Harrison, a respected U.S. Army veteran, returns to his small southern town, seeking a peaceful day at the local grocery store. However, Officer Thomas Brown, driven by bias, wrongly accuses him of wrongdoing and escalates the situation to a humiliating arrest. As onlookers rally in support of the general, the incident unveils deep-rooted racial tensions and calls for justice. Harrison's dignified response not only leads to Officer Brown facing consequences, but also sparks a community conversation about discrimination and resilience. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. It was a sweltering summer afternoon in a small southern town, where the oppressive heat hung heavily in the air like a thick blanket, wrapping the streets in a stifling embrace. The sun beat down relentlessly, casting shimmering waves of heat that danced above the pavement and made the very atmosphere seem to shimmer with a hazy glow. Life in this town moved at its own unhurried pace. It was a place where people greeted one another with warm smiles and friendly nods, recognizing each other by face even if names occasionally eluded them. The local grocery store on the corner served as more than just a place to buy food. It was a vibrant hub of social interaction, where neighbors exchanged gossip, shared the latest happenings in their lives, and discussed everything from town events to the state of the economy and even the unpredictable weather patterns that seemed to shift with the seasons. For General James Harrison, this particular day felt markedly different from those that had come before. After dedicating a substantial 35 years to a successful career in the U.S. Army, he had finally returned home, ready to embrace a new chapter of his life. This transition was not merely a location change. It represented the culmination of a lifetime of service, shaping him from a fresh-faced second lieutenant into a high-ranking officer, revered not just for his rank, but for the unwavering dedication, strength, and honor he had exhibited throughout his military career. His very presence commanded respect. His posture and demeanor radiated a sense of discipline and dignity that was hard to overlook. He was a man not easily intimidated nor one to be shaken by the challenges that life threw his way, having faced countless trials and tribulations during his years of service. On this particular day, much like many others, Harrison found himself drawn to the local grocery store, a familiar haunt where he could pick up a few everyday items and perhaps engage in some lighthearted conversation with the locals. He had grown accustomed to the rhythms of small-town life, where the pace was slower and interactions were often steeped in genuine warmth. Dressed in simple yet well-maintained clothing, he did not fit the typical mold of a military officer. His black polo shirt fit snugly against his broad shoulders, and a pair of jeans clung to his athletic build, presenting an image of casual comfort rather than authoritative command. This moment of peaceful normalcy felt refreshingly new to him. After years spent navigating the structured chaos of military life, he longed for the serenity and tranquility that his small town offered, where the biggest concerns revolved around the garden's yield or the latest town gossip. As he parked his black Chevrolet Tahoe in the lot, the engine sputtered to silence, and he stepped out, inhaling deeply the hot, thick air that enveloped him like a warm embrace. It was a typical summer day, and the sounds of the town buzzed around him. Children laughing, the distant hum of cicadas, and the occasional bark of a dog. Officer Thomas Brown, patrolling the area with a keen eye, happened to notice Harrison's arrival. Brown was relatively new to the town, having transferred only 6 months prior, and he was eager to make a name for himself among the community and his colleagues. Young and ambitious, he was viewed by many as overly rigid, and his interactions were often laced with a certain degree of bias that had already earned him a reputation during his brief time there. Brown's perspective had begun to cloud his judgment. He harbored preconceived notions about the black residents in the community that made it difficult for him to engage with them on equal footing. This bias stemmed from an underlying insecurity that shaped the way he dealt with people who didn't fit into his narrow view of authority. As he observed General Harrison stepping out of his vehicle, Brown's attention honed in on the man's confident stride and composed demeanor. Bias and suspicion crept into his mind almost instantly, clouding his judgment. A black man was driving a nice car, dressed casually, an incongruity that seemed to trigger something in Brown's mind. Without any rational basis or thought to his prejudices, he convinced himself that Harrison looked out of place, an intruder in a neighborhood he was sworn to protect. "I'll just check his ID," he thought, his mind racing with unwarranted suspicion as he made his way toward Harrison. It was as though the heat of the day had seeped into his reasoning, distorting his perception of the world around him. The moment felt charged, as if the air itself was thickening with tension. "Hey, you," Brown barked, his voice harsh and grating, as if he were addressing a common criminal rather than a respected military general. The sharpness of his tone sliced through the warm afternoon air, drawing the attention of nearby shoppers who paused to witness the unfolding drama. General Harrison halted momentarily, confusion flickering across his features as he processed the officer's aggressive command. It was a startling contrast to the respect he was accustomed to receiving, a feeling he had fostered throughout his illustrious military career. "Yeah, you in the black shirt. What are you doing here?" Brown continued, his voice dripping with a condescending authority that was anything but respectful. The words hung in the air, laced with unspoken hostility and a clear implication of suspicion. Harrison, a man who had always been met with professionalism, now faced a troubling misunderstanding that stirred within him a deep sense of anger and disbelief. As Officer Brown advanced, his body language radiated aggression, every step calculated to intimidate rather than engage. The tension in the air became palpable, and Harrison felt a surge of emotions, a mixture of confusion, indignation, and a protective instinct. After years of service, he had learned to read people and situations, and the way Brown carried himself suggested a dangerous blend of arrogance and insecurity. This was not merely a matter of mistaken identity. It was a confrontation rooted in deep-seated biases that had no place in the world they both inhabited. At that moment, the vibrant life of the town around them seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the two of them locked in an escalating confrontation, one that would test the limits of patience, dignity, and the principles that Harrison had fought to uphold throughout his life. "Is there a problem, officer?" Harrison inquired, his tone calm and steady as he met the officer's gaze with unwavering confidence. He stood tall, his posture relaxed yet alert, a practiced demeanor honed from years of navigating tense situations. Despite the serenity he projected, an undercurrent of tension pulsed within him, a familiar sensation that urged him to prepare for the conflict he sensed was inevitable. "Yeah, there's a problem," Officer Brown retorted, stepping forward with an air of authority that seemed to saturate the air around them. His body language was aggressive, each movement purposeful as he invaded Harrison's personal space. The contempt in his voice was palpable, an unspoken assertion that Harrison was out of place. "I don't like how you're hanging around here. This area isn't for people like you. Let me see your ID." The words were not merely a request. They were a demand, steeped in bias and the unwavering certainty that Harrison did not belong in this space, as if his very presence was an affront to the order Brown believed he was enforcing. "I'm here to pick up groceries, just like everyone else," Harrison replied, maintaining his composure as he tried to project calmness. The slight twitch in his jaw was the only indication of the growing frustration simmering within. Years of experience had taught him the importance of keeping a steady voice and a calm demeanor when faced with hostility. It was a skill he had mastered in both military and civilian life. But with each second, the familiar tension inside him began to swell, threatening to breach his carefully crafted facade. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Officer Brown, however, was unmoved by Harrison's composed demeanor. Instead, he seemed to feed off the power dynamic, determined to assert his authority in this charged moment. "I said show me your ID now," he insisted, his voice rising with a menacing edge, laced with aggression that suggested he was itching for a confrontation. "Or I'll arrest you for non-compliance." The threat hung in the air, thick and oppressive, a clear warning that he was willing to escalate the situation without a second thought. Realizing that this confrontation could spiral out of control at any moment, Harrison took a deep breath, grounding himself in the face of escalating tension. "My ID is in the car. If you need it, I can go get it," he offered, his voice measured, hoping to diffuse the situation with reason. Yet Brown, clearly entrenched in his aggressive stance, wasn't interested in a peaceful resolution. "Didn't you hear what I said?" Brown shouted, his frustration boiling over. Without warning, he lunged forward, grabbing Harrison's arm and twisting it behind his back with a forceful grip that radiated anger and a need to dominate. The heat of fury flushed Brown's cheeks, and for a brief moment, he reveled in the exertion of power, finding satisfaction in the control he held over Harrison. As this tension escalated, a crowd began to gather in the parking lot, drawn by the commotion. Bystanders paused in their daily routines, their curiosity piqued by the scene unfolding before them. They turned their heads, some stepping closer, others remaining at a distance, but all were transfixed by the sight of a white officer physically restraining a black man who, to them, appeared dignified and utterly respectable. The dissonance between the general's demeanor and the officer's aggression was striking. Smartphones emerged from pockets, the familiar click of cameras capturing the encounter for posterity. Some residents knew General Harrison well. To them, he was not just another passerby but a community figure, a local hero who had served his country with honor and distinction. They recognized the man before them, a general whose dedication and sacrifice had earned him the respect of many in the community. "That's General Harrison," someone in the crowd exclaimed, their voice filled with incredulity. "What the hell is going on? Why is he being arrested?" The murmur of shock rippled through the gathering onlookers, their faces a mixture of disbelief and concern. They watched in growing horror as Officer Brown tightened his grip on Harrison's arm, forcing him into handcuffs, even though the general showed no signs of resistance. The sight of such an esteemed figure being treated with such brutality stirred something deep within the crowd, a collective outrage simmering just beneath the surface. As Officer Brown continued to assert his authority, the onlookers exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. They were witnessing an egregious misalignment of justice and power, a stark reminder of the biases that still permeated society. The juxtaposition of the officer's aggression and the general's quiet dignity became a powerful visual representation of the larger issues at play, igniting a flame of solidarity among those who watched. At that moment, amidst the chaos and confusion, Harrison felt the weight of their gazes upon him. It was a complicated mix of emotions, frustration, fear, and an overwhelming sense of injustice, but he was determined not to show vulnerability. As he stood there, handcuffed and surrounded by onlookers, he silently resolved to confront this moment with the dignity he had always embodied, hoping that, perhaps, his presence would serve as a reminder of the values he had fought to uphold both on the battlefield and in his everyday life. Some of the older residents in the crowd were veterans themselves, men and women, who had served their country alongside General Harrison in years gone by. They stood frozen in horror, their faces etched with disbelief and outrage at the scene unfolding before them. Memories of camaraderie and shared experiences flooded back as they watched one of their own, someone who had fought for their freedoms and the values they held dear, being treated with such disrespect. The palpable tension in the air thickened with each passing second, creating a stifling atmosphere that hung over the crowd like a heavy fog, a silent acknowledgement of the injustice they were witnessing. As more people became aware of the commotion, the gathering swelled, drawing in onlookers from all directions. Families, friends, and concerned citizens were pulled toward the spectacle, each one curious to understand the disturbance. Voices began to rise in a cacophony of protest and confusion, a mix of incredulous shouts and urgent demands echoing through the crowd. Some called out for Officer Brown to explain his actions, while others shouted fervently for him to stop what he was doing. Yet, Officer Brown remained unfazed, his focus entirely on the task at hand. In his mind, he had everything under control. His pride wouldn't permit him to back down, and his inflating ego refused to acknowledge any possibility of error. "You're under arrest for disobeying an officer," Brown proclaimed, his voice booming as he tightened the handcuffs around Harrison's wrists with an excessive force that seemed intended to exert dominance rather than enforce the law. The sound of metal clinking against metal reverberated through the air, sending a jolt of indignation through the crowd. Anger erupted among the onlookers, their shouts growing louder and more impassioned as they recognized that this was not merely a routine stop. It was a blatant act of racial bias laid bare before their eyes. "Let him go!" cried an elderly woman, her voice cutting through the uproar like a knife. "That's our general. He served our country." Her words resonated deeply with the crowd, igniting a fierce wave of solidarity among those who knew the general's contributions to their community. But Officer Brown was impervious to the pleas and protests around him. He was intoxicated by the authority he wielded at that moment, blinded by a sense of control that only deepened his misjudgment. The escalating scene quickly morphed into a glaring symbol of the racial tensions that had simmered beneath the surface in this town for decades, now bubbling over in a vivid and painful display of injustice. The air crackled with a mix of anger and frustration, a palpable sense of discontent brewing among those who had come to witness what was unfolding. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Just minutes later, another patrol car screeched to a halt, the sound of its tires on the pavement cutting through the chaos. The arrival of a second vehicle seemed to offer a glimmer of hope to the onlookers, who were desperate for resolution. Sergeant Martin, a man who had dedicated years to serving this town with integrity and respect, stepped out of the vehicle. He had always prided himself on knowing the community and its members, and he immediately sensed that something was wrong as he surveyed the growing crowd. His heart sank as he spotted his colleague Brown, the man he had often trusted to uphold the law, handcuffing General Harrison with an air of arrogance that made Martin's blood boil. "What's going on here?" Martin called out, his voice firm and authoritative as he pushed through the throng of onlookers, determined to get to the bottom of the situation. As he moved closer, he could feel the tension in the air shift, the collective eyes of the crowd turning to him with a mixture of hope and desperation. "Everything's fine, Sergeant. Just checking this guy out," Brown replied smugly, attempting to maintain a facade of confidence. His bravado, however, did little to mask the unease radiating from the surrounding crowd. But the moment Martin locked eyes on General Harrison, a wave of recognition washed over him. He had known the general personally for many years. Harrison was not just a local figure, but a revered veteran, a man who commanded respect in the community for his bravery and leadership. Seeing Harrison in handcuffs ignited a surge of anger within Martin. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted, urgency lacing his tone as he rushed toward them, his instincts screaming that this was not just another routine stop, but an abuse of power that had gone too far. "This is General Harrison. Take those cuffs off now." The gravity of the situation crashed down on the scene like a thunderclap, and Brown's bravado faltered, his face turning a shade of crimson as he froze in place, stunned by the sudden shift in authority. "General," he muttered, his voice trembling, a mixture of disbelief and realization dawning upon him. How had he made such a grave mistake? In a frantic attempt to rectify the situation, Brown fumbled with the handcuffs, desperately trying to unlock them. I didn't know who he was," he stammered, his words feeling empty and inadequate in the face of the crowd's judgment. The air was thick with a sense of injustice, a collective understanding that what had transpired was not just a blunder, but a painful reminder of the biases that still permeated their community. As the crowd watched, their expressions shifted from outrage to a shared sense of indignation, united in their condemnation of the injustice that had just unfolded before them. The incident had sparked a fire that could no longer be contained, a clear signal that the community was ready to confront the racial tensions that had long lingered in the shadows, waiting for a moment like this to ignite change. Despite the deeply humiliating circumstances that surrounded him, General Harrison exhibited remarkable composure in the face of adversity. He understood that he was not merely confronting an overzealous police officer. He was standing against the entrenched systemic bias that has long plagued law enforcement and the ignorance that fuels such prejudiced behavior. The air was thick with tension as he calmly addressed Officer Brown, stating, "We all make mistakes, Officer Brown," his voice steady and resolute as the handcuffs fell away from his wrists. "But your job is to protect, not to humiliate. You must serve justice, not bias." Harrison's measured response resonated with the crowd, who were witnesses to this unsettling scene. His dignified words sparked an eruption of applause from those present, a clear indication of their support for the general's stance. It was a moment of collective solidarity, emphasizing that this was not just about one man's experience. It was a statement against the systemic issues that affect countless individuals. Amid this outpouring of support, Sergeant Martin stepped forward, his voice cutting through the cheers as he announced that Officer Brown would be suspended pending a thorough investigation into his conduct. The weight of this decision hung heavily in the air, illuminating the seriousness of the situation for everyone involved. Officer Brown stood there, his head bowed in shame and disbelief, grappling with the harsh reality that his career might now be at stake. The realization hit him like a freight train. He had allowed his biases to cloud his judgment, and now he was facing the dire consequences of his actions. The contrast between his position of authority and the accountability he now had to face was stark, serving as a painful reminder of the responsibility that comes with wearing a badge. In the days that followed, the incident at the grocery store quickly gained traction in the media, becoming a focal point of discussion in both local and national news. Video footage of the altercation spread rapidly across social media, igniting heated conversations about the enduring presence of racial bias within law enforcement and its implications for everyday interactions. People from all corners of the country began to engage in dialogue about the systemic issues that allowed such incidents to occur, sharing their own stories of encounters with bias and discrimination. For many, General Harrison's experience became a rallying cry, transforming his narrative into a symbol of the ongoing fight against injustice and the need for systemic reform. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. As the investigation progressed, the consequences for Officer Brown became increasingly apparent. Ultimately, he was dismissed from the police force, a decision that reflected the serious nature of his actions. To reclaim some semblance of integrity, he publicly issued an apology, addressing General Harrison and the community for the distress he had caused. While this acknowledgement of wrongdoing was a necessary step, it was clear that the road to redemption would be long and arduous. The incident, while painful and disheartening, also catalyzed change within the town, prompting a collective reflection on the critical work that still lay ahead in dismantling prejudice and fostering a culture of respect and understanding. Meanwhile, General Harrison continued his tireless work advocating for veterans and social justice. His calm and dignified response to the traumatic experience inspired countless individuals, serving as a beacon of resilience and moral integrity in a world often overshadowed by prejudice and division. Harrison's story became a testament to the power of standing firm against injustice, illustrating that one individual's strength of character can ignite change and inspire others to take up the mantle in the fight for equality. As discussions surrounding the incident unfolded, it became clear that the story transcended Harrison's individual experience. It emerged as a vital reminder that while prejudice remains a daunting challenge, it can indeed be confronted and ultimately overcome through collective action, education, and an unwavering commitment to justice. The dialogue that ensued in the wake of the incident underscored the importance of community involvement and the necessity for ongoing conversations about bias in law enforcement. The impact of General Harrison's experience reverberated far beyond that single day at the grocery store, signaling a broader call to action for individuals to recognize their own biases and strive for a more just society. This incident served as a poignant reminder that in the face of adversity, the strength of character and a steadfast commitment to what is right can pave the way for meaningful change. It encouraged individuals to confront their biases and foster discussions that could lead to greater understanding and compassion. General Harrison's dignified stance amidst humiliation became a symbol of hope, illustrating that through resilience, advocacy, and community solidarity, the fight against discrimination can prevail. Ultimately, the narrative of this encounter became more than just a single incident. It evolved into a broader movement, reinforcing the notion that the struggle for equality and justice is ongoing and requires the collective efforts of everyone involved. As we wrap up this powerful story of General James Harrison and Officer Thomas Brown, we're reminded of the importance of dignity, respect, and the ongoing battle against prejudice in our society. This incident isn't just a moment in time. It's a call to action for all of us to reflect on our own biases and how we treat those around us. What have you learned from this encounter? What insights or lessons do you plan to take into your daily life? We invite you to share one thing you've learned and how you intend to practice it moving forward in the comments below. If you like this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more impactful stories and discussions. Together, we can continue the conversation and work towards a more just world. Thank you for watching.